Okay, so we're gonna wait a little bit, see if people will show up. But hi, my name is Lauren. I am here at the Bee Museum at our marine wall exhibit, and I am really excited today to talk about the ecology of coral reefs. And as a little thing to look at, behind me we have a lot of great examples of coral. We have some lettuce coral and mushroom coral all throughout this wall right over here. So while I'm talking, you could maybe even go and take a look at our coral wall over here. But first, we are going to talk about what does ecology even mean, guys? So, ecology is a study in biology, a portion of biology that studies the relationships between an organism and their ecosystem, which is made up of living things and non-living things. All really cool. So, when we talk about your ecology, maybe if you're a kid at home, your ecology would include living things that you are going to eat, like things from your garden right now. Gardens are growing in the summer, so maybe tomatoes. That is a portion of your ecology. You're interacting with a living thing. And then also you are interacting with non-living things, like the structure of your house is built of non-living things and you're interacting with that. Or one in the summer that we could talk about is how sunlight is affecting your skin. Have you been sunburned this summer? That is your body interacting with a non-living thing, light, and there's a relationship there. So that's your ecology. But when we talk about coral reef ecology, there's a very similar situation. So coral reef are going to be interacting with animals that use the structure of the coral reef as a habitat. That could be fish, or that could be eels, or that could be turtles. All kinds of animals use the structure of coral reef as a habitat, as well as non-living things like temperature. Coral reefs are super affected by temperature, and because of that, they have to grow in specific spaces. They have to grow in specific places in the ocean that are usually warm, as well as they have to be really close and have a space where they can get light, because they're also dependent on light. And we're going to talk about why they're dependent on light and why they have to grow in shallow areas also today. So, we first are going to talk about coral reefs itself. So, I'm going to grab one of my coral reefs over here. It's really cool if you look at it up close, but this coral reef is called a staghorn coral reef. That's its common name. And I'm going to use it to illustrate what they're all made up of. So coral reefs, when we think of coral reefs, we think of these big, kind of blocky, large structures, but in reality, they're made up of lots of tiny animals. They're made up of tiny animals called polyps, and polyps are something called an invertebrate, which is something without a spine. If you've been to a Bee Museum vertebrate variety show, you've learned about invertebrates, but other invertebrates are insects or lobsters, and polyps are one of those invertebrates in that category. So polyps are really, really tiny. They can be as small as a pinhead, or they can grow to, or they can be as large as a basketball. And one of the ways that we categorize coral is if they are, one category is a small hard polyp coral, which is this. So if you look at those little indentations, that would be where the polyps lived when this coral was alive. So that's really cool. But if we look at our mushroom coral right over here, so this is an example of a large polyp coral, a large hard polyp coral. And the reason we say hard is they leave behind these structures, these limestone structures that they build in their life to protect their soft bodies. But the large polyps are this size. This is one whole polyp, which is really cool. And finally, our final category has to do with soft coral. So soft coral doesn't leave behind this limestone structure, but instead looks a lot more like plant life, but is still considered an animal. So this is a fan coral right here. You might see it if you are scuba diving, or we have examples of fan coral up here on our wall as well. It's really thin, and this fan coral is super dependent on waves and the tide to bring food to it. It usually grows near a current where it can be brought lots of food by the ocean, which is cool. But it does not, the difference between this type of coral and this type of coral is that this is a hard structure made out of limestone, and this one is a soft-bodied structure that's only going to leave behind not even as much hard limestone, and definitely just leave behind some organic material when it dies. This is dried. Yeah. So now that you know all of the 3 categories of coral, the basic 3 categories, we are going to talk about hard coral specifically, and we are going to talk about the relationship between polyps and algae. It's a symbiotic relationship. So polyps, they form this hard structure in hard coral out of limestone to keep them safe, because as invertebrates they don't have as much structure around them, and it's harder for them to survive if they don't form this skeleton right here that they're going to leave behind. So they form this skeleton, but this type of structure actually turns out to be really good for habitat of plants and animals. So we're going to talk about plants. Hard coral generally has a symbiotic relationship, and when I say symbiotic, I mean that it benefits one of the organisms in the relationship, and they are in a symbiotic relationship, algae is, with hard coral, and the specific type of algae is called zooxanthellae. And the zooxanthellae algae is actually in a mutualistic symbiotic relationship. So that means that it not only one organism gets benefits, both organisms actually get benefits. And we're going to explain that all the way. So the zooxanthellae algae grows within this structure right here, and the zooxanthellae is going to do what all plants do, is it's going to participate in the process of photosynthesis. So through photosynthesis, it's going to take water and sunlight and carbon dioxide, and it's going to make sugar and oxygen, which feeds the polyps that live on this structure that form the colorful coral reef that we know and love. So the polyps are going to be fed by this algae, but what is good for the algae? Why is it a mutualistic relationship? And it's a mutualistic relationship because the algae is able to live on this structure. It has a safe home. It's not going to be floating around in the ocean. Instead, it has something to hold on to so it can grow and develop to its fullest state, which is really awesome. And that's the symbiotic relationship of the two. So when we think of it in ecological terms, this coral is the polyps as a living organism are interacting with another living organism, the zooxanthellae, the algae, and it benefits both of them, which is really cool. And a little bit more about algae. Algae can grow for up to 4,000 years. This is the oldest algae that's been found so far. And it continues to grow its whole life cycle. There is never a point in its life cycle until it dies that it stops growing. And when it stops growing, it's no longer, when it dies, it cannot have the color in it anymore because those structures, the animals, the polyps, are no longer living in this structure anymore. So instead, what happens is this limestone structure gets left behind. It's no longer alive, it's no longer living anymore, or growing, and the polyps are all dead. So that's why there's no color. And that's what happens when we talk about coral bleaching, if you ever heard that. So that is when coral turns this stark white color, and it usually signifies that the coral has died, but because of pollution, often the coral's life cycle stops abruptly, and it leaches the bacteria, the zooxanthellae, which causes it to starve, and it doesn't have any more food, and then it dies, and it changes color, and it's no longer bright and vibrant anymore. Instead, it's this stark white color. And guys, I'm going to show you a couple more examples of some coral we have here at the Bean Museum. So this right here is a branching coral. It's often called a spruce coral, if maybe that's correct. I believe that is the correct name, but I know that it is a branching coral, and you can tell by its structure, everybody. You see right here, there are lots of different stems from the original structure, which is why it's called a branching coral. And then we have our brain coral. And this one is really cool because you can really see where the polyps lived, those indentations. You can see where the polyps survived and were connected to this structure. And polyps, everybody, a lot of people think that coral are rocks or plant structures because of how they look, but in reality, all those animals, the polyps, are living on this structure, and they have digestive systems, and they have a mouth that differentiates them from plants and non-living things. So they are definitely still alive, and they're really cool. So take care of your coral, and specifically in the ocean, we need to be able to understand coral and the bleaching process, because if we are putting pollution out into our oceans, we should be aware of how it's affecting the organisms there. And how it's affecting organisms like coral is it's stopping their life cycle really quickly. Remember, they can grow for up to 4,000 years, but instead of growing for 4,000 years, because of the pollution, they leach something that they need to survive. They leach that bacteria, that algae, and they are not able to be fed anymore, and they die, which is harmful to all the animals that are dependent on coral, like fish, crabs, shrimp, lots of crustaceans, and actually 25%, it's been estimated by the Oceanic Conference sorry, my bad. But anyway, it's been estimated, everybody, that 25% of marine animals are dependent on coral reef at one point in their life cycle. That's 25% of the ocean animals. That's a really big deal. So if we lose this ecosystem and if we lose these organisms in our ocean, it will have lasting effects for the whole lives of thousands and millions of animals. Yeah, so everybody, what I want you to have learned from this Life Science Live is know a little bit more about coral. They're alive, they're cool organisms, and know that we need to take better care of them in our oceans. Thanks so much. Bye, guys.